Hello, I'm Richard Parkinson, the chair in Egyptology at the University of Oxford, and these are my colleagues.
I'm Elizabeth Frood, I'm Associate Professor of Egyptology.
And I'm Maren Schentuleit, I'm Associate Professor of Egyptology and Coptic Studies.
And we're the main full-time staff who teach Egyptology, and we all work on remarkably different things. And today we'll talk a little bit about our own research and about the sort of things we teach and supervise here at Oxford. We don't get a chance to talk about research much between ourselves, so it's going to be quite interesting for us as well. I work on Middle Kingdom literature, which is the poetry of the golden age of ancient Egypt, which is around 1850 BC. And as you know, I'm very keen on working with manuscripts, simply because that's one of the distinctive things about poetry. It's written in the cursive script called hieratic, and it gives you, I think, it can give you a sense of reality. Because these are not monumental carved hieroglyphs, they are presented in handwriting, and the handwriting's bad, the handwriting's sometimes really careless. You can see the mistakes, the sort of things people are making as they change their minds. So it brings us a bit to the humanity of the texts. And I especially like Egyptian poetry because it is often forgotten about. It's rather unstereotypical. Nobody thinks the Egyptians wrote love songs or stories or jokes, and it allows us to get a bit closer to the world of ancient Egypt in its own words. And one of the things we do in reading texts in the Oxford course, and texts are very much the focus, is to try and get beyond the meaning of the words. And people, I think, imagine it's just about grammar and vocab. And in a typical text class, the first question is always, what is the verb form? But then it's also, and what does that mean? And trying to push people beyond this simple decoding metaphor, which is such a ghastly stereotype for Egyptology. And with poetry, you have also an emotional element. And so I've often worked with actors and actresses, Barbara Ewing, whom you know, Liz, to get a sense of how emotional these works are and how fast they were. And of course, what they do is they present a version of the Egyptian world which is not the standard propagandistic view that we often get from grand historical narratives. It's taking us a little closer to lived experience, we feel. And again, the manuscripts here really help us in that, because on one of the manuscripts I work in Berlin, a favourite thing is the fact there's a fingerprint. And it's just as the title hero of the poem gets his new name. So it's a really nice reminder of the sheer humanity of the ancient Egyptians. They are not ancient Egyptians, they're real people. And when we teach hieratic, this cursive script, in the Ashmolean, we now do it from the Will of Naunacht, from your village. And here we have a moment where you can see the pen moving off the papyrus for a few seconds, and then it slips back down on the papyrus. And there you can actually see a pen moving through the air after 4,000 years. And that, I think, gives you this sense of real lived experience. And what I'm working on at the moment is one of the set texts, the Tale of Sinuhe, which is from around 1850 BC, and that is a narrative poem, as fine as Shakespeare. It is the great masterpiece of Egyptian literature, and it's not alone in its quality, but it tells the story of a courtier, and it's his life story, but it goes catastrophically wrong. It all comes right in the end, of course. But in the poetry, you get a sense of the tensions, the emotions. He moves from one emotional panic-stricken crisis to another. So I very much identify with it. It's really a man struggling with his own cultural identity. It's about refugees. It's about alienation and the search for home. So it really gets to the heart of a lot of things. And what is so fascinating is it's written on papyrus. This is a facsimile of the entire poem. You can see it's not really very long. It's like a paperback. But it's taking the monumental autobiography. And that autobiography, well, what Sinuhe wants to be is somebody like this little official, a man called Yah, who is about the same date as the composition of the poem. And this is how you present yourself as an idealized, young, youthful, efficient official with your self-presentation. And that is what Sinuhe takes and just blows to pieces. And it plays with the genres. And you really can only get to the emotion if you've read lots of autobiographies and you know what he's doing. Mm. And it explores the gaps, the fissures, the realities, the nasty realities of ancient Egyptian life and the uncertainties. And that I find is really exciting. And there you feel as if you're getting the culture expressed not only in its own words, but from the inside. But in order to see what it's doing, you have to have as second nature what the normal autobiography is. And of course, autobiographies is one of the topics you work on.
Yeah. Although my autobiographies are idealizing, presenting, as you said, the kind of perfect self represented by the statue, and what I love about them is both that tension with referencing the past, referencing standard ways of phrasing, and people trying to do something new and trying to represent themselves in ways that are new and different, but within the code, within the boundaries of what is right and expected. And so I enjoy kind of seeing that tension. And I think we read a lot of autobiography, obviously, as part of the course, because autobiography is a central genre in ancient Egypt. It's attested in most periods, so we read texts, from Old Kingdom through these autobiographical texts from all periods. And that's a joy for me, not just because of my research interests, but also because I think their multimodal quality, their integration of image, text, monumental context, so tomb and temple, and even landscape. Some of them even speak to landscape in their autobiographical storytelling, and I find that is really useful for students. It opens up so many worlds to them. And in my period, so I work on the New Kingdom, so mid-second millennium onwards, mid to late second millennium onwards, statues similar to these were set up on processional routes into temples, and they speak through the texts inscribed on them, and maybe through the pose and the way they're set up, they speak to audiences. And part of my research, and very recently, has been to explore those different statue voices and the way statues create their own autobiography. And I'm really interested in exploring what that means for statue bodies and how the ancient Egyptian craftsmen and commissioners, how they perceived what a statue body was and how it acted within temple space, within tomb space as well. But I'm very temple oriented. So I'm very interested in the choices these elite men make, or that are made for them, to fashion a distinct identity and to craft that, and the selections that are made. And I say elite men really deliberately. I'm emphasizing that because we don't get autobiographical voices. Well, it's thought that we don't really get autobiographical voices for women until the early first millennium. But I've been really exploring this. I'm really interested in how autobiographical voices are created and crafted for women. And this is just a really great example. I've been working on this fairly recently. So this is late New Kingdom, so probably around 1200 BC.
And from Thebes?
This is from Thebes. It's from the Theban tomb, beautiful, tiny, jewel-like tomb. And it looks very standard iconography, and there you have like this image of this woman, and you would expect a very standard caption in front of her face, and it looks like a very standard caption giving her name and title, and yet it has the first person pronoun here. So she says, Yannick, I am the lady of the house.
Exactly, Sinuhe does right at the beginning, as so many autobiographies say. So it's not just a I am, it's a signal of a genre, a whole genre.
Absolutely, it marks that claim to identity and the autobiography beginning. No, it doesn't continue for her. This is what we have, but it's turning a caption into a voice and into this kind of claim to personhood. And as you say, marking that kind of autobiographical beginning, start.
Wow, yeah, I've never
so,
seen.
Yeah, she's really fab. So I've been working on this a little bit, and just to...
And is that part of the main decoration of the tomb, or was it added later? It's part of the main decoration.
It looks like it's part of the main decoration because I've been looking and looking at the signs and the way they're kind of painted elsewhere in the tomb, and it looks like it's added at the same time. But most of the captions in the tomb have the red framing lines, and she doesn't have that. So it starts to look a bit like a graffito, and that was added later as a kind of secondary addition. And it could be that, but the hand is so close to the hand elsewhere in the tomb. So, and we've got it twice. So she has her Lady of the House title and then a songstress title. She says, I am. Also in the judgment scenes. So I think it's about these transitions as well. So she is someone that I am making play with right now in my writing and research. And her laconic self-presentation, minimal self-presentation yet that says so much, also connects with my my other major research project, which is graffiti. So this is temple graffiti from Karnak.
Very good.
How do you read them? How do you read them?
It's pretty. This is one of the most difficult blocks that we have, so I thought I would bring the most extreme to the conversation.
That was quite scary.
And what we have in this context is usually just names and titles, sometimes pictures, little images of gods, but often it's just names and titles. So again, that really minimal self-presentation, and what can we do with that? And you have to sort of think about it in context again, and the kind of crucial context. Like, where is this block in the temple? Which wall is it on? Why do they cluster all their graffiti here? Why are you getting this layering, this palimpsest of graffiti in this area of the temple?
It's not just words and names. There's a whole set of meaning by the context, the physical form. Yeah. And
you wonder if carving your name into the wall is enough. It doesn't have to necessarily. It relates you to that place and the sanctity of that place and all the meanings that we can't even possibly access of what that place means just by picking up a piece of flint or using a metal chisel and carving your name. And a lot of my work, all of my work on graffiti has been grounded in the archive of a scholar, Claude Tranacare, who worked on this graffiti, on this corpus of graffiti in the 1960s and 70s. And I have his archive, so I'm really fortunate that he donated his archive to the Griffith, and I've been able to work on it, the Griffith Institute, and I've been able to work on it. And this is just an example of one fragment from the archive. That's a squeeze from the temple wall. So basically layering, I think it's probably some sort of paper, I think, wet paper that has been set into the wall, like to make a cast, essentially, and then peeled off to create this squeeze. And it just gives this man's name and title. It's
In hieroglyphs.
In hieroglyphs,
Yeah.
so it's quite unusual because
Yeah.
most of our graffiti's in the cursive
Yes.
script and hieratic. And it gives his name Amunnacht. And I think by using hieroglyphs, it's a way of distinguishing yourself. And we have some people using hieroglyphs in this corpus, on this wall, and I think it's a way of it's a strategy of distinction that they use to mark themselves out against the others.
And it would take more time to carve. It's not just more formal, it's also more
Time consuming,
more expensive.
and more effortful. Yeah. And they also kind of, often those that carve in hieroglyphs carve themselves above head height, so they're getting equipment to raise themselves above head height to make themselves even more visible in the white plastered wall of the temple. I also have to say that we don't record this way anymore, so the squeezes are not permitted for obvious reasons. And one of the things we've been doing is a lot of experimental techniques with photography to try and create depth maps, for example, of blocks like this, to allow us to see the palimpsest and to see the graffiti that we can't read with our own eyes. That once we start creating depth maps using these photographic techniques, then we can start to try to read them, to try to decipher them. That's really exciting.
I mean, I know it's a dreadful, old-fashioned and a dangerous way of doing it. It is very vivid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one-to-one. It's still got this parts of the stone of Karnak stuck to the paper. So it really gives you context. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. It becomes an object in its own right, and you can really, you can interpret it in all those ways. Whereas, photographic techniques, for all their brilliance, will not give us necessarily that immediacy, and also that immediacy of being up against a temple wall, and that's something, I go to Karnak as often as I can, because no matter what we can do with the photographs, we always need to be there, and that is something I try to communicate to the students as well. That it's part of how we think about engaging them with wider contexts.
And the archive is such an important part of the teaching, and we've had students do dissertations and volunteer in the archive, really. So it's wonderful teaching resource as well as the Ashmolean artifacts. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think it would be great if we could have more students doing research on the archive, because there's so many opportunities there. In the end, the graffiti for me open up these windows onto the ordinary kind of practices of the people that are moving through the temple space, the scribes and the priests, and they're kind of how they relate themselves to the environment that they're in, how they make themselves present in this environment permanently. And it's that window onto temple practice and temple life that is so compelling with the graffiti for me. So, and I know that resonates, I think, a bit with your work as well, Maren.
Yes, yeah, I'm very much focusing on temple in Greco-Roman Egypt. So in the temple milieu at that time, so after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, there was a script and language called Demotic. So this is a very cursive script, which was written in that time alongside Greek, because Greek became the language of and script of the administration. But within the temple milieu, Demotic, so the Egyptian language, the last phase before Coptic, Demotic was written in the temple milieu. And what you both said about voices, this is what I get from the material from a settlement in the Fayum called Dime, so this is a picture of it with the remains of the huge temple precinct. And from the temple, we do not have only we do not only have administrative texts, which are very interesting for me to see the administration of the temple and the economy of the temple, but also, contracts set up by the priests there. And so, for example, we have, this is a facsimile of a marriage contract. So
It's huge.
It's a huge one. Papyrus was very expensive at that time, of course.
That's quite flashy then.
Ostentatious.
Yes, that's really.
So somebody really made an effort to write down a contract between a man and a woman, saying, well, it's basically about the heritage. So if this marriage if the man or the woman would divorce their partner, it says who is getting the payment, who's getting payments, or the children of the couple.
It's a prenuptial agreement.
It is. And,
Yes.
and this is more than 2,000 years old. So it's very modern, and this is for me one way to picture and to explore ancient lives in Greco-Roman Egypt.
And the late period has it so lucky because there's more documents. I mean, we don't have a marriage contract from earlier periods at all, and suddenly you get this density of detail that's.
Are they normally that big?
Well,
do you have many marriage contracts?
We have a lot of from the Ptolemaic times onwards. A little bit before the late period, we have already marriage contracts, which also show the age when men and women married, and this is so we can see there's a development from let's say the women were much younger in the late period than later in the Ptolemaic and Roman period.
By much younger, what do you mean by much younger?
Well, I would say like teenage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the girls would be teenage age, and the male men are usually a bit older. And what we can also see is that in these marriage contracts that so we have marriage contracts between, let's say, 20-year-old women and 25-year-old men, and then in later life they would sometimes marry for a second time because of the one partner would have died, and so that this is not rarely it's not rare that we see older men and women married for a second time. And then of course there were children from a first marriage, and so they have to be. This is one of the topics in marriage contracts, because priests belonged to the wealthier groups of the society.
So there's money that has to be.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And then, so besides these documentary texts showing biographical information about people in Dime, in this settlement, we have a huge amount of administrative texts from the temple.
This is fragmentary.
So at the moment I'm working on a text corpus called which we call the Agreements of the Priests, and this is just really a cutout of these. Sometimes, so these rolls were like 3 meters long, and we have to puzzle them together from a lot of fragments. They're all written in Demotic because this is part of the temple administration. And these texts basically say what the different groups in the temple had to do. So their duties, and if they did not fulfill their duties, the fines they had to pay. And this gives me this sense of they were just humans. And of course, when you say or when you see what fines did they have to pay when they were not fulfilling their duties, we can reconstruct the lives, the duties, the tasks the priests had to do on a daily basis in the temple.
I mean, for earlier periods, sort of on autobiographies on graffiti, all you've got is the name and the title.
Yeah.
And the title meant something to them, but you've got the full
So we
details
fill-
of what
yes,
it really
yes.
meant.
Yeah,
What it
so
actually,
we can
yeah.
you can fill this with information.
Yeah.
And there's
that's
there
amazing.
will also when you work on the Greco-Roman period, you need Greek,
Yes.
ancient Greek. So it's very useful. But also I work with information from hieroglyphic inscriptions. So this also feed into this, and hieratic texts, because all these scripts and all the languages were written in the Greco-Roman period.
And all have slightly different meanings and slightly different uses.
Yes.
So
Registers,
it's a really complex picture of data. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so much data. I'm really jealous.
I'm jealous.
No.
So cool. Wow.
Yeah, so I think you can get a sense that we're working on very different periods and very different types of documents, very different contexts, but there's still this common thread of the fact the text is more than just a set of words.
Yeah.
It's a document, it's an artifact. And one thing with the course we try to do is teach through texts, but get the texts to speak about the history and the culture as a whole, and not just words on a page, but really as artifacts. So when we read a Middle Kingdom hymn, we'll tend to read it from photographs, and behind us we can see there's a stela, and we've used that in text classes. And it's one thing to say to one of the students, so it's quite heavy, it was expensive, but when they have to carry it out of the case and put it on the table to read it, then you feel. And I think part of this concern with lived experience is to try to get into the mindset, the lived experience, and really get just that step closer.
I think
to
we,
people.
I mean, our text classes are always kind of geared towards this, I think, but we also, the museum handling classes offer that immediacy. I mean, as you say, with the stela up there, it's having the objects on the table, examining them, seeing a thumbprint on a pottery shard, or thinking about the stone type that is being used to create a particular vessel and why, and the man hours that it took to create a stone vessel in a hard stone, and the investment of time. And I think once students are kind of confronted with that in the museum classes, it really gives them that direct feeling of understanding just more about human activity, human experience. We keep coming back to that.
And also with some of the stone vessels, we can talk about the expense, we can talk about the symbolic qualities of the stone type, but you can't get away from the fact when it's on the table in front of you, it is beautiful.
Yes.
And that's very difficult to write about, but the stone is chosen because it's expensive, it's hard to work, but it's also spectacular. Yeah. And so the aesthetic aspect of these texts, of all sorts of texts, I mean, the demotic marriage document, it's a legal document, but even I can tell it looks nice. This is my birth certificate. This is, it really, and somehow that says something about the institution of marriage and the pride and the importance of the property. Yeah. So I think, that's something we really, I think, all share and all bring to the classes.
Yes.
With the classes, one of the great strengths of the Oxford tradition is you are teaching in very small groups, and we're very lucky to have a range of specialists covering a large amount of Egyptian history. So we always try and teach as close to our research specialism as possible. But of course, we're not trapped in that narrow framework. So because Egyptian poetry talks about things going wrong, the gaps, the fissures in the ideal life, quite openly, I've, from that, have tended to work quite a bit on the history of sexuality and gender, and that has developed into a couple of dissertation and theses topics on the representation of women and the way those power relationships are somehow idealized and made acceptable in a tomb as, with the occasional voice. And another thing is also the history, the reception of the tale of Sinuhe is bizarre. It's ended up as a Hollywood epic, catastrophically so. It's also ended up in a male stripper in a Bratislavan cabaret act. So it really gets about as a poem. But that reception history has led me to work on the history of Egyptology. And so we recently had a dissertation where somebody was working on on the very recent production of Philip Glass's Akhenaten, which was a steampunk vision of ancient Egypt, and very effective. But so we stick close to our research, but we try and look outwards as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the undergraduate that did that with you, she started out wanting to work on costuming.
Yes.
And then it ended up being such an interesting study of the various aspects of the opera. It was wonderful. And I love that the students always come to me with topics that I'm like, oh, but I don't work on that. And I have to supervise that. Yes. But actually, I love it. So I had a student do Kushite jewelry with me recently, figurines, which was really interesting, Nubian cemetery funerary practice. And all of these, yes, I think, when you drill down, you can see the connection with my research interests and the things that I'm interested in, but they push me far beyond that. And I find it a bit intimidating at first, but I get such a kick out of, being pushed into these new areas by our students. So
one learns a lot by teaching.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such an obvious thing, but it is such a privilege they're often so inspired by the classes that they develop these ideas from the classes and from the material they've been looking at. And that's so exciting to see them go off in these new pathways that take us with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what I find very, very interesting for me and my research and my teaching is that we have a lot of students coming from classics, because we have this joint school, and they have the Greek background. And what they do with me is multilingual and multicultural Egypt. So exploring the influence of the Ptolemies, of the Greek culture to the Egyptian culture, and the other way around. And then having Demotic and Greek, or even doing a more archaeological topic. It is so rewarding to have students with this background, and you usually don't have these in other universities. So this joint school is really a great opportunity here in Oxford.
And do they often come with a particular vision of what they're going to be taught, and you deconstruct that? Because the classics training is quite particular.
Yes, absolutely. I find that they have a certain picture, and this picture of Egypt also is taught by classicists. And then we have this conversation. We have the history and civilizations lectures in the first year, and they start with that, and then it's a kind of an eye opener for them, how we are exploring Egyptian culture and language. This is so different from the classics to
But it's not just classicists who have a vision of Egypt that we have to
you're absolutely right.
destroy and rebuild. I think everybody comes with an enthusiasm, but it's based on the mummy films, it's based on all sorts of stereotypes. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the subject, having so much data and being quite a young subject, is we can't take anything for granted. We think, a graffito is, we know what that is. No, we don't. Not in Egypt. We don't know what an autobiography is. We don't know what a marriage document will do, how it works. So I think that's the fact we're a young subject is an advantage occasionally. Yeah. So we have quite a lot of fun.